So today we need to do a baseline fuel economy test on this diesel-powered Honda Insight. Now, here's a question for the audience. What does this Honda and this Renault have in common? It's a tough question, and I'll give you a hint. Well, neither car has a cabin heater. Now, normally that's not a problem, but it's actually kind of cold right now. You know, it does that in the winter. Anyway, in order for us to drive this Honda far enough to measure its fuel economy, I'm going to have to put a heater in it because I don't like to suffer. This car actually came with a heater way back in the day, but someone thought it was a good idea to put a 212cc lawnmower engine in the car, and to make the car as light as possible, a few unnecessary parts were removed. And if you look closely, that's the heater right there. Unfortunately, this picture was taken about 3 years ago, and all these parts have been scattered into the wind, so we need a plan B. Let's check out some options. We could try one of these low-cost diesel cabin heaters, and from what I understand, this will make the car nice and warm, and they're economical to run. However, something like this requires a bunch of holes that need to be drilled into the car for the intake and the exhaust ports. I don't want to do that, so this thing is out of the question. Perhaps an electric heater? Nope. Electric heaters are stupid for automobiles. You only need to do the math to figure that one out. And if you can't do the math, well, that can be your homework assignment. But don't bother. The reason they don't put electric heaters in cars is they consume an enormous amount of energy, and it's all in the math. Anyway, that leaves us with only one real option, and that's to go shopping on the Jungle site and pick up something that may or may not work. And that's what we did. So in this box, there's an El Cheapo heater kit that uses the wasted heat that's generated by the engine and transforms it into something we can use to heat the cabin of the car, or in other words, a heater core. So this guy is plumbed into the cooling system and uses the hot coolant that's normally generated by the engine. Anyway, by diverting the hot coolant to this heater core, we can extract the heat with a couple of fans, and theoretically we can heat the cabin of the car with free energy. Well, more or less free. It takes a little bit of power to energize the fans. Now, typically a blower fan absorbs 30 to 50 watts of power. On the other hand, a fully electric heater, like one on a Tesla, absorbs 2,500 watts. So yeah, electric heaters use a lot of power in order to generate the heat. On our application, we're diverting the heat that's normally sent to the radiator and using it to keep the cabin warm. So this is all the stuff that comes with this $60 kit. These thingies are ducts, and they slip onto these nubs here. I reckon these are used to direct the heat to specific places. For instance, these ducts can be used to direct the heat to defrost the windshield, which is handy. But this car is stored indoors, and if the weather is bad enough that we need to use the defroster, then we ain't driving the car. So we're not going to be needing these. These braces are really crappy, and we won't be using these either. Actually, the only thing we will be using is the heater core, some hose clamps, and the blower speed controller. The rest of the stuff I'll put in stock and use for another project. So off camera I did some poking around in the car and sort of settled on a location for the heater core. Now, to open up some space, I temporarily removed the glove box, but we'll be putting that back in once we're done. So there's plenty of space under the dashboard, and that's because all the crap that's supposed to be here is missing. Yeah, I know I should have saved all the parts, but I didn't. Anyway, about the best spot to put this heater core is right about here. Now, what makes this the best spot is subjective. You see, by putting the core here, I don't have to do a lot of work, and I won't have to modify anything on the car. You know, if we make some brackets, the front of this core can bolt right up to this cross brace, and to support the back of the core, there's actually a big steel pipe that's, well, it's hard to see from this angle. Fortunately, I shot a picture of this a few years ago when I had the dashboard out of the car. Yep, there's the pipe right there, and that's what we're going to use to support the rear of the heater core. So in order to get this core to bolt into place, we're going to need some brackets. And to be honest with you, I don't feel like making brackets right now. So I got these crummy brackets from Menards for a few bucks. Now these brackets will get the job done, but there isn't enough space on the back side of this lid to bolt the brackets in place. So we'll need to weld them in place. And for the rear hanger, we're going to use this pipe hanger. A few moments ago, I mentioned that we're going to be welding these brackets to the lid of the heater core. Now, that's a problem. You see, these brackets are galvanized, and welding galvanized releases toxic gases. So before I weld the brackets, I need to remove the galvanized plating. And to do that, I'm going to use muriatic acid. Muriatic acid is actually hydrochloric acid, and it's pretty much the same acid that's in your digestive system. And to get a little gross here, the strength of the acid is about the same as vomit. Acid is acid, and this stuff is not a toy. Vinegar also works, but it takes a little bit longer to dissolve the galvanized plating, and I don't feel like waiting, so in essence, I'm going to be using store-bought vomit to clean these parts up. The fumes this stuff generates are harmful to breathe, so I'm going to put this outside for a few minutes. Well, there we go. I left the brackets in the acid for 10 minutes, and the coating is completely dissolved. Now, like I said, vinegar will also do the same thing, but it might take a day or so. My welder is specifically made for auto body repair work, and it has no problem welding this very thin steel. Now, obviously, I had to grind the paint off the areas that I wanted to weld, and in doing so, I discovered the paint they used when they made this heater core is real gummy. It doesn't really grind off. You know, I've never encountered such crappy paint before. Okay, so here's the finished product. Now, don't judge me for the terrible paint job. There was just no way I could prep the surface with the paint that was already on this thing. Fast forward a few minutes and the core is securely mounted to the car. Now, I know what you're thinking. Is there enough room for the passenger to sit comfortably with the core hanging there? Well, I don't know. Let's find out. Yeah, as far as sitting goes, it seems fine. Now, whoever sits here is going to have hot air blasting on them all the time, but that's not my problem. You see, I'll be sitting in the captain's chair. This is how engineering is done. Speaking about engineering, here's a better look at the rear hanger, and this is how the core is mounted to the cross brace. All we need to do now is connect these pipes to the diesel engine, and conveniently we have a hole in the firewall to pass the coolant lines through. I love it when a plan comes together. Fortunately, this diesel engine has a convenient location to connect the heater core to, and when we built some of the engine braces, we left plenty of room to make our connections. Let me clear some of this stuff out of the way so you can get a better look. That's better. Now, back when we had this engine in the Saturn, we used the same connection points to tie this diesel engine into the Saturn's heater core. The thing about the Saturn is, the heater core was huge, and we got plenty of heat from it. But if the fan speed was too high, well, the heater core would actually pull too much heat from the engine. I'm hoping the smaller core that we're using will provide adequate heat without overcooling the engine. Putting antifreeze in this engine is a bit tricky. You see, the radiator cap is below the highest point in the cooling system. In order to avoid the tedious process of burping air bubbles from the cooling system, I fill the engine from the water neck housing. Now, there's a tiny bypass hole in the thermostat, and that'll allow the air and the liquid to get through. But to speed up the process, I apply vacuum to this hose, and within a few minutes the cooling system's filled. This is not ideal, and the solution is simple. I just haven't ordered the parts yet. Maybe I'll do that tomorrow. Update. We finished the installation of the heater core and then wired it into the car. As soon as we turned on the blower motor, well, the speed controller let out a puff of smoke. So the mystery is, why? Turns out that the fan is completely shorted out and measures as close to 0 ohms as possible. Or, in other words, this is a piece of shit. Fortunately, the other fan is still good. The problem is it's only 4 days before Christmas, and getting a replacement fan here in Podunk, Kansas is not easy. However, we do have one on the way, and if you're seeing this video on December 24th, well, then the parts must have arrived on time. Let's cut to Jimbo while he's driving the car on the fuel economy test. Well, so far so good. No serious issues to report. The heater's working and blowing warm air, but it's also kind of warm today, so I don't think we really needed the heater. Now the heat is warm, but not hot. And if we take a look at the temperature gauge, the engine's only running at 160 degrees. Now the temperature seems to be hovering between 150 and 160, even though we have a 185 degree thermostat. Before I left this morning, I partially blocked the radiator to help the engine run a little bit hotter, but I think I have to do a little bit more. Now, last winter when we had this engine in the Saturn, it took a bit of experimentation to get the cooling system balanced. Anyway, I would really like to see the temperature closer to 190 degrees, and we'll get that sorted out soon enough. Looks like we covered 59 miles so far, and the car has been super reliable. Now, despite its stellar record for reliability, we are more or less staying close to home base, and we'll be wrapping up this fuel economy test soon. So this fuel economy test, well, it's just a baseline test. I'm driving the car normally and trying to keep the speed between 55 and 60 miles per hour. It's funny, but at exactly 56 miles per hour, the noise from the exhaust, it's not so bad. Keep in mind, we still haven't put a muffler on this car yet, and we'll do that soon, but before we do that, I wanted to collect as much information as I could about the performance and fuel economy before we made any changes. The process of finishing this car is more than just nuts and bolts. Normally, auto manufacturers spend millions of dollars and years to do stuff like this. Well, we don't have the time or a budget that big, so give us a week or so, and I think we can do it for about $100, maybe a little more. So here's something interesting. The homemade axles that we put together in episode 39 seem to be perfect. No weird vibrations, and as you can see, the car is moving. So yeah, the axles seem fine. Really, other than the exhaust noise, this car drives really well. Personally, I hate doing fuel economy tests because, well, the amount of time it takes, but it really does give us a chance to identify problems. Now, does anybody care to take a guess as to the fuel economy this car will get? So keep in mind, I'm not doing anything special as far as driving, and the car still needs a lot of work. Here, I'll give you a hint. The Saturn was able to get 59 miles per gallon on its first try, so I reckon this car will get about the same or a little bit better. Okay, well, I think we covered enough distance to do some reliable calculations. Let's head back to the shop. So according to the Garmin, we covered 77.8 miles. Now, I tried to keep the speed between 55 and 60 miles per hour when I could, but there were some stretches of the road where we had to go slower due to the local speed limit. So that works out to 47 miles per hour for a moving average, which is about right for one of our typical tests. In order to measure how much fuel this car has consumed, we would have to drive it 300 or 400 miles just to get an accurate number. Even with a good heater, I really don't want to drive this car that long, so I devised an alternative method to measure the fuel consumption. Here's a cutaway diagram of the fuel tank that we modified in episode 42. And as you can see, it has two pipes going into it. This longer pipe is the feed line, and this is what feeds the diesel engine the fuel that it needs. And this is the return line. So exactly how much fuel did we consume on this run? Well, I don't know, but I do know how to find out. Before we started the fuel economy test, we temporarily disconnected this fuel line from the engine and we connected it to an electric fuel pump. Once we turned on the electric fuel pump, it started to drain the tank until the level got to about here. Now, there's still some fuel left in the tank, but that doesn't matter. We're only concerned about how much fuel can be pumped out to this level. Anyway, we took the fuel that we pumped out and weighed it, so now we know exactly how much fuel we have. You see, we can calculate the volume of the fuel by its weight. Now, once we know how much fuel we have, we just dumped it back in the tank and then we took the car out for its fuel economy test. During the test, we of course consumed some fuel, like so. Now, after the test, we went ahead and pumped the tank down again and weighed the fuel that remained. The difference in the weight before and after the test is how much fuel we consumed. Now, this process of filling and emptying the tank is very consistent, and we practiced it several times before we did any testing. The only issue I have with this process is, well, it takes a while to do. Of course, we took a 1-liter sample of fuel and weighed it so we would have a reliable weight for a specific volume of fuel. Diesel fuel generally weighs about 850 grams per liter, but that's an approximation. The actual weight per liter can vary. On our sample, we found out that 1 liter of fuel weighs 830 grams. Now, before we continue, I have to apologize to my comrades here in the States for using metric numbers, but all my measuring equipment's in metric for some reason. Anyway, driving the car normally and maintaining a speed of about 55 miles per hour, we got 67.02 miles per US gallon, which ain't bad. There's certainly room for improvement as far as fuel economy goes, but we also have to work on performance because this car is too slow when it comes to acceleration. So we have a lot more work to do. I feel with the performance data that we've already gathered and today's fuel economy results, we can now move forward and start tweaking the car. Of course, we're going to be putting a muffler on this thing as soon as possible because I'm pretty sick of listening to all that noise. Also, we still have to put this belly pan under the car. Now, I really tried to package the engine and transmission as tight as possible so we could use this belly pan, but unfortunately it won't fit and it'll need some modifications. So about a month or so ago, I had some fans of the show drive up from Texas and they donated this spare Kubota D722 engine. I'd like to thank Jason and his friend for this very generous donation. Now, this is actually a complete engine, and I have it partially disassembled to do some minor repairs. Anyway, while we sort out stuff on the car, I'm also working off camera to fabricate the parts to get the AMR 500 supercharger to fit the little diesel engine. Right now we're using this spare engine to do all the mock-up and fabrication work. So don't worry, we have plenty to do on camera and off camera. Now, if you made it this far into the video, you're likely already subscribed. However, if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so, because nowhere on the internet will you find a project like this, especially a small displacement supercharged diesel. Now, I've read the comments, and a lot of you folks are really looking forward to the supercharger episodes that are coming up, and I'm right there with you. I wish I could work twice as fast to get this stuff done, because I'm just as excited as you are. Anyway, I have a lot to do this week, and it's time to get going, so we'll see you next time. Until then.